story time with any Gina.
The classroom fell silent when Ethan wheeled himself to the front. No one had expected him to speak up, especially not today. Most days, he just sat in the back of the room, his wheelchair tucked quietly beneath the desk. The kids didn't really talk to him. He didn't mind much, he was used to it. He had learned to find comfort in being alone. But today was different. Today, Ethan had something to prove. Ethan, Mrs. Miller said, her voice a little uncertain. Do you have the answer to the problem? Ethan's fingers tapped the armrests of his wheelchair, his mind already racing ahead. He had solved the math problem in less than 5 minutes faster than anyone else in the class. It was a problem no one had been able to crack all week. And yet, Ethan had found a way. He rolled forward, reached for the whiteboard marker, and without hesitation, began to write out his solution. His handwriting was neat and clear, his equations flowing smoothly. The class stared at him, wide-eyed, as his pen moved across the board like it had a mind of its own. When he finished, he turned back to face the class. The entire room was quiet. Mrs. Miller looked at the board, then back at Ethan, clearly impressed. This is perfect, she said. No one else in the class has figured this out. How did you do it? Ethan didn't smile. He never really smiled much, not because he was unhappy, but because he didn't need to. His mind was the only thing that mattered to him. He had always been good at understanding things quickly, solving problems that made other kids frustrated. But that didn't make him popular. In fact, most of the time, he felt like an outsider. The other kids didn't get it. They saw the wheelchair first, then the quiet boy who didn't speak much. They didn't see how brilliant he was, how his brain worked like a super-fast computer, solving puzzles and equations in his head before anyone even finished reading the problem. Well, thank you, Ethan, Mrs. Miller said, clearly trying to hide her surprise. Class, I think we have a lot to learn from Ethan today. But instead of applause, there was only awkward silence. Some of the kids shifted in their seats, unsure of what to say. A few glanced at each other and whispered. It was the same thing every time Ethan would do something amazing. And yet, the other kids would just ignore him. No one really knew how to talk to him. As the bell rang and the class ended, Ethan wheeled himself to the door, already used to being alone. He didn't mind the silence. It was easier than the awkwardness that came when people tried to be nice out of pity. No one ever really understood him. He was just the boy in the wheelchair, the one who didn't belong in the big games at recess, or in the lunchroom with the laughter and jokes. But that didn't bother him much anymore. He had found comfort in his own company, his books, his puzzles, his sketches of far-off lands and impossible inventions. That was where Ethan found peace. People were unpredictable. Books, however, were always the same. That afternoon, as Ethan wheeled himself down the hallway, he heard footsteps behind him. At first, he thought it was just someone walking by, but the footsteps grew louder. He turned to find Jake, one of the boys who usually laughed with the others when they made fun of Ethan. Hey, Ethan, Jake said, scratching the back of his neck. That was really impressive. How did you figure out that math thing? Ethan blinked, not sure if he had heard right. Jake, the same kid who had once thrown a crumpled piece of paper at him during a science class. The same one who snickered when he struggled to push his wheelchair up a steep hill. He wasn't sure how to respond at first. I just thought about it differently, Ethan said quietly. Sometimes, you have to look at things from a new angle. Jake nodded slowly, like he was trying to make sense of what Ethan had said. Yeah, I guess. I always get stuck on those kinds of problems. You're really good at that stuff. Ethan shrugged. I like puzzles. They're simple once you figure them out. For a moment, there was silence between them. Ethan felt a strange knot in his stomach. He wasn't used to people talking to him like this, not without an agenda. But Jake wasn't laughing at him. He wasn't making a joke. So, Jake said, breaking the silence, maybe you could help me with the next one. I always get stuck. Maybe you could teach me some tricks or something. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Was Jake really asking for help? The same kid who had barely noticed he existed before now wanted to learn from him. It didn't make sense. But for the first time, Ethan didn't feel angry or uncomfortable. Maybe it was just a question of finding the right way to connect. Sure, Ethan said, his voice steady. I could help. The next few days felt different. Ethan wasn't used to the attention, but he found himself helping Jake after class with math problems. At first, it was awkward, with Jake fumbling over words and equations. But slowly, he started to understand. Ethan found ways to explain things that made sense to Jake, showing him how to break problems down step by step. And bit by bit, Jake started to improve. One afternoon, Jake came up to Ethan after class, a grin on his face. I got the answer, just like you showed me. I can't believe it. Ethan looked at Jake, surprised. You did? Yeah, I actually did it on my own. Thanks, man. I never would have gotten it without you. For the first time, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough. Jake wasn't just the kid who used to ignore him. He was someone who had learned from him. Someone who respected what Ethan had to offer. It wasn't that Ethan suddenly had a ton of friends, but it was a start. He realized that maybe he didn't need to change himself to be accepted. Maybe, just maybe, the right people would come along if he kept doing what he loved: solving problems, helping others, and being true to himself. Over time, a few more kids started asking Ethan for help, and though it never turned into a big group of friends, it was enough to make Ethan realize that there was more to school than just fitting in. There was room for being different, for being brilliant in ways others couldn't understand. And that, to Ethan, was all he needed to feel a little less alone.
Thank you for watching. Please click on the subscribe button and the notification button to get notified when we drop new stories. Thank you.